Starfield is the Xbox's big next-gen killer app that we've all been waiting for, but there's something that we've all been wondering here at VG247, which is, how's it going to run on the Series S, the lesser powered of Microsoft's current consoles? And the answer is, well, like this. Like this is the footage. This was captured on Xbox Series S by my colleague James, who's been playing the game pre-release in order to get some guides ready for you, because that's his job. He is our guides editor. And he's got about between 40 and 50 hours into the game so far. We've got a couple of other videos on the channel about what he thinks of it, and the gist is that he likes it very much, but there are caveats, as there are with any creative assessment of any creative work. Of course there are. But sticking purely to what is the experience like on the Xbox Series S, according to him, it's pretty good. Frame rate's pretty consistent, the game doesn't feel too compromised, and aside from a bit of texture popping here and there, it seems like a pretty rock solid presentation, even though if you look at the footage you can see a fair amount of jaggies and blurries in the image. But you know what, it's the low res console that comes at a low res price, so we're not exactly expecting it to resolve detail at 4K or anything like that. Image quality wise, it looks about as good as Cyberpunk 2077 does on the system, which isn't too bad, as in edges are a bit raggedy, but it's all present and correct. Perfectly playable. Obviously it runs at 30 FPS, as does the Series X version, as far as we're led to believe. I haven't seen any footage of the Series X version yet, because I don't have my copy yet. This is all I'm going to see of the game until mine unlocks on Friday. So I'll get to see how it runs on Series X when it's actually running on my Series X. And it just looks like a Bethesda game. It looks like Skyrim in space, which is essentially, that's the proposition here, right? It's like, this is Skyrim in space. It's a lot more No Man's Sky-ish than I expected. There's a lot of cutting about on barren rocks, using a laser gun to mine minerals and things like that. And it doesn't have No Man's Sky's color palette, which is probably the most striking difference between the two games. No Man's Sky, of course, is influenced by book covers from the golden age of science fiction, 50s, 60s and 70s, and the book covers from that sort of era had these wonderful paintings that almost look like prog rock album covers, which is really striking, really colourful. They had to stand out in bookshops, right? And that is the main influence on No Man's Sky's look. I remember Sean Murray talking about it back in the day. Starfield is coming at a similar idea from a very different place. So its art direction is grounded in mechanical realism, heavily inspired by NASA of the real world. They in fact call it NASA punk. You've probably heard that in the marketing, and it's sort of like steampunk but for Poindexters and Virgins. No way, that's also steampunk. But that NASA worship aspect is one of the most fascinating things about Starfield for me, or at least it has been in the run-up to release. The fact that it's a completely new type of setting that Bethesda have never done before. It's space, it's a big wide open galaxy. Obviously there's some crossover in terms of game design between Fallout 3, Skyrim and this, and as I've said, it's patently a Bethesda game. It clearly plays minute to minute like every other Bethesda game. But in terms of the wider scope of it, the space flight and all that kind of stuff, that's definitely new ground for the studio. But it absolutely ties into what they've always been about, which is that these are people making fantasies based on their experiences growing up in America in the 70s. Now, obviously Bethesda Softworks is a big team, and therefore there's a wide, diverse range of ages, ethnic backgrounds, cultural experiences, etc. But the wee big man at the top, Todd Howard, the other producers, Tim Lamb, Pete Hines, these guys are all clearly children of 1970s America. Well, Todd Howard grew up obsessed with a tabletop role-playing game, a science fiction one called Traveller, and one of the first things he tried to do with an Apple computer when he first got his hand on one when he was a kid was to try and recreate Traveller as a video game. You could argue that at this point in his life he eventually succeeded. Now, I'm not saying Starfield is really anything like Traveller, the tabletop game, because I've not played that, because I'm not a child of the 70s or a Poindexter. I mean, I'm a bit of a Poindexter, but imagine having pals to actually play tabletop games with. You'd have to have pals in the same city as you. I've not had that since 2003? Anyway, look, this is entirely beside the point. Sorry about that. I'm fucking notorious for getting beside the point and then 50,000 miles away from it. But there's a sense that Starfield is the game these guys were born to make. That sense of NASA supremacy over the space race. That sense of American exceptionalism, although at a point where America started its downturn as a world power. I mean, it's going to have a long decline phase, don't get me wrong. Probably not quite as long as Rome's, but you know, long enough for you guys to survive it. Take it from me, take it from someone who's lived their entire lifetime so far well within the decline phase of Britain. And I was born when it was already like 50 years on the go, you know? These things take time, don't worry about it. You don't have to worry about it. It's just your kids that are fucked. What was I talking about again? Right, Starfield, yeah, space and that. So, Todd Howard and Pete Hines and all those guys, they're guys from the 70s, and that's got something to do with the art direction. I can't even look, it's been a long month, right? Just forget I was going down that tangent. I've talked about this about 7 different times anyway. There's a whole article on the website. Actually, the last video I did about Starfield, I went into all this, so I don't know why I'm going into it again. It's probably because I'm nearly 40, so I've only got 3 fucking anecdotes at any one time. The main takeaway about this, right, is that when I got the footage from James, I said to him, did you capture this on Xbox or what? He said, oh yeah, I captured it on Series S. It was all captured on Series S. And I thought, because at that point I'd only seen it in like a little preview window on the Google Drive web browser, I was like, oh wow, that looks really good. And then I blew it up to full screen to watch the footage back, and I mean, it's like, if you're playing this version on a 55-inch telly, you might be better off role-playing as an astronaut with glaucoma. And it still has that Bethesda thing of every character looks slightly like a potato person. But the scope of it, the scale of it, the cities, the world simulation and the environmental storytelling, all that wonderful Bethesda stuff is incredibly present and correct at scale. And what I love about it, that art direction that's grounded in that tactile realism. You walk around any environment and you can feel the zips, the switches, the switch hats, the levers, the chunky buttons. You feel that sense that the only thing separating you from the vacuum of space is some alarmingly thin material. That stuff, that magic stuff that Bethesda is amazing at above all else, that environmental storytelling, environmental world building, it's great here, and it's supported by all this micro detail, and that is all there in the Series S version. There is a nagging sense that what you're looking at here is a lot of high quality assets that you're looking at through kind of like a low res, like a gauze filter. Oh shit, Gaussian blur, is that where that comes from? But yeah, it's clear that this is a version that has certain compromises, but it runs smoothly enough. It's perfectly playable. It's a perfectly enjoyable experience, according to James, who loves it, as you'll hear directly from him in the other videos that we've posted. You can also read VG247's review, which is on the site now, and rest assured we're probably going to be talking about this game for the rest of your natural life, so if you're desperate for info about it now, in 6 months time you'll be begging everyone to shut up about it probably. And just to be clear, yes, there are loading screens everywhere. It's just like every other Bethesda game. They haven't started streaming the environments and you still have to read the same 12 gameplay tips on a loop every time you enter a new environment. What makes this a current gen game is the sheer amount of it and the sheer amount of detail in it. But mechanically, you basically already played it in 2006, except now there's asteroid fields and dogfighting and you get to kid on your Han Solo, albeit a version of Han Solo who spends most of his time doing the space equivalent of beachcombing. I cannot tell you how much what I just said is not a criticism of Starfield. I'm pretty sure I'm gonna lose entire fortnights of my life to this. From what I can gather from all my colleagues who've played it, to all the footage I've seen, it's got that wonderful, methodical job simulation stuff of something like Elite Dangerous or Euro Truck Simulator, the obsessive collecting and crafting and inventory management of something like No Man's Sky or Minecraft. All that, but with the through line of Bethesda's signature world building. Settlements that feel populated, rooms that feel lived in, wee notes left everywhere, skeletons on toilets, all that kind of patter. Worlds that aren't just empty sandboxes to go and do the busy work in, but that are blessed with that little drop of humanity that Bethesda brings to its sandboxes. The little drop of humanity that gives you a reason to do all the other stuff. The very thing that I often feel is missing from these other experiences I've talked about. So yeah, looks great. Looking forward to it, and looks like you'll have a great time if you're playing on Series S as well, which is good to know. And that's well over 10 minutes now, so I can stop. Oh, thank Christ! I was running out of stuff to say.